the Second World War, specially converted carriages were used to transport wounded and sick soldiers from northern Queensland to southern Queensland and army hospitals by train. Special hospital ambulance trains were used to ferry Allied soldiers along the North Coast Railway line. The C18 class locomotives, introduced in 1914, were really big power. These locomotives were used to haul the express trains that ran from Brisbane to the interstate station, then at Wallangarra. In the early 1950s, country railway passengers were introduced to a cool way of travelling: air conditioning. Beginning with the Inlander in 1953, the long-distance passenger trains running to regional centres had specially built air-conditioned trains provided. A Yankee in the Queensland bush. Somewhere on the railway line west of Toowoomba in the early 1900s, a locomotive takes water. QR borrowed a lot of American influences for its steam locomotives and carriages in the period of the 1870s to 1940s. Roma Street Station, Brisbane in 1940. Newly recruited soldiers prepared to go to camp near Caloundra and travel on a troop train to Landsborough as they prepared to serve their country. Today, this is King George Square, Brisbane. In 1914, QR celebrated 50 years since the first construction began on the railway. A special display was put in on Albert Street showing the old and the new. A specially constructed temporary track was laid from Roma Street for this event. Roma Street Station in the late 1880s. A brand new steam locomotive is put on show for the QR hierarchy. A publicity shot for QR in 1900. This was used as a photo on timetables and advertising brochures for many years. It was taken near Chelmer, in what is now suburban Brisbane. Driver and fireman show the pride in their job. AC-16-224, built in the United States in 1943, shows itself off at Warwick in the mid-1940s. Advertising of holiday destinations was done by photographers in carriages. The message was simple: Queensland has a lot to offer, and by train is the best way to see it. In the 1890s at Grantchester, some steam locomotives posed for the photographer. Driver and fireman took real pride in their charges in those days, keeping the locomotives polished. Some would even come in on their days off to provide the special touch to their treasured locomotives. The KSR, or Kuranda Scenic Railway, is one of the great railway journeys of Australia. The fellows look tough, don't they? Building a railway is a tough job. At Yamba in 1915 in central Queensland, a work train waits to lay some sleepers and track. In the 1960s, steam locomotives were rapidly disappearing from the transport landscape of Queensland. On the railway from Ipswich, Yarraman, the last regular steam trains operated in southern Queensland. The last train ran in November 1969. Goods, passengers, everything went by rail and steam train for 104 years. The original Central Railway Station in Brisbane was built in 1889 and was just a large tin shed. In time for Federation and a new century, a brand new central station was constructed. It opened in 1901. Steam, smoke, motor cars and the old clocks and destination boards outside Central Station in the 1920s. In those days, you could hop on a train at Central in Brisbane and eventually end up at Ravenswood, Ravenshoe, Kooyar, Calliope, Ayr, or even Aramac. In the early 20th century, many country centres in Queensland were ideal places for a holiday. How about a trip out to Killarney or Emu Vale from Warwick? Health and vigour were restored after getting away from the stressful life you lived in Brisbane a century ago. The Central Railway was a railway that was built to the setting sun. Heading west from Westwood, some 50 kilometres west of Rockhampton in the 1870s. Many towns in Queensland were created by Queensland Railways, and on the Central Railway towns, such as Barcaldine, Emerald, Longreach and Blackwater, owe their existence to the construction of the railway. Fancy a holiday at the beach, but not with surfing, boogie boarding or those sorts of activities? Greenmount was the guest house that you could take a train to from South Brisbane Railway Station. A 4 or 5 hour journey that would have you off the train at Coolangatta Station, and then a motor car would take you to your lodgings. It's 1867 and work is underway to complete the first major section of railway construction in Queensland. Railway workers, or navvies, were recruited from Great Britain to work on the early railway in Queensland. 31st of July 1865 was the opening of the first section of railway in Queensland. Not long after, the first trains began to operate on the 35-kilometre line between Ipswich, Grantchester, Briggs Camp. An early train poses on the first railway bridge across the Bremer River in Ipswich. This was a road rail bridge, with the iron horse sharing the bridge with the oats-eating type. 11th of January 1865, and the first steam locomotive on Queensland Rails, number 2, goes for a trial trip at the North Ipswich Railway workshops. A few local schoolboys apparently hopped in for a free ride on this trial run. They came from all over Great Britain and Northern Europe to build the first railway lines in Queensland. In 1867, the family of one of the contractors who built part of the Southern and Western Railway line posed for a family photograph. Have a close look and see the family all turned out in their best clothes, with a silver service dinner set on the dining table. Beyond the end of the railway line in Queensland, there were always other settlements that lay just over the hill. Stagecoaches provided a link to other towns and places further out. It wasn't until 1924 that the last regular stagecoach with a connection to a train ran in Queensland, from Yulba to Surat in southern Queensland. The old timetables were like a book in themselves. So many places in Queensland and beyond to visit. The railway promised prosperity and also brought business and shortened the time taken to travel between the many towns and regions of the state. Building a railway was a hard business and required special skills and knowledge. Here's how it was done. Track formation prepared and a team of track builders or navvies laying down wooden sleepers. Rails were hand-spiked to the sleepers using special hammers.